so delighted to welcome you back to the beautiful Nile River here in Egypt. The Nile is the second longest river in the world. Only the Amazon is longer. But what makes this river so incredible is the history that has passed along its waters. And for salvation history, we know that it was a witness to the signs and wonders that the Lord performed when he was freeing the Hebrews from slavery here. And so let's talk about this battle between Pharaoh and God and see these signs and wonders, these plagues that happened that eventually allowed Pharaoh to make the decision to let the people go. Taking advantage of the fact that we're here on the Nile, I wanted to talk about the plagues that came over Egypt that the Lord told Moses to tell Pharaoh about. The whole goal of this, if you read the entire text of the Bible in Exodus, is that Pharaoh would let the people go, but that it wouldn't just be the people that would be leaving, it would be all of the people, the men and the women and the children and all of their belongings, all of their cattle, all of their sheep, all of this. Because at the beginning, that wasn't the plan. At least, in my opinion, after reading the first part of Exodus, this is what the Lord was trying to do. Keeping the Pharaoh's heart hardened, in a way, would allow him to finally say, just go with everything and all that you have. So if you read about the plagues, and you can find that in Exodus, starting in chapter 7, there are 10 plagues. We're going to talk about 9. And in many of those, he told Moses, go and find Pharaoh in the morning when he goes down to the Nile. So he has his staff. Moses and Aaron are both together at this point. Remember, Aaron is Moses' older brother. And the first plague is when the water of the Nile turns to blood. So you can imagine, this is just one of the small, it's not a tributary, but it's one of the side parts of the Nile. It was extremely wide. It was, very, very large. And so you can imagine what would happen or what it would have looked like when I read what happened here, starting with verse 14. The Lord says to Moses, go and find Pharaoh in the morning, as he is going out to the water. Wait for him by the river's bank, and take in your hand the rod which was turned into a serpent. So he goes and he petitions him to let his people go. And then the Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, take your rod and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the rivers, their canals, and their ponds, and all their pools of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in the vessels of wood and the vessels of stone. Everything, all the tributaries, all of these things became blood. So let's go back to this one part where it says that all shall be blood throughout the land, both in vessels of wood and vessels of stone. The water became blood. We spoke about how Moses is the type of Jesus. Jesus, his very first sign was the wedding at Cana, and that water became wine in the exact same word, vessels of stone, back in Cana. And so we can see how if you were anyone of the Israelites who understood their history, you would understand exactly why that first sign in Jesus' life is so important. And eventually, of course, that wine would become his blood at the Last Supper. All right, let's go to the second plague. What was the second plague? Just to remind ourselves, this starts in chapter 8 of Exodus, and that is the plague of frogs. You can imagine in a freshwater river like this, there's plenty of frogs. But what happened here, the Lord says to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your rod over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools, and cause frogs to come out upon the land of Egypt. So Aaron did this, and the magicians were able to do the same thing. So of course Pharaoh's heart was hardened, but there were frogs everywhere. And eventually the frogs they disappeared after Moses had them disappear. But of course Pharaoh hardened his heart. So let's go to the third plague. That would be gnats. You can imagine this. And this is very interesting. It says, stretch out your rod and strike the dust of the earth, like the dust you see behind us. There's dust everywhere. And listen to what it says, that it may become gnats throughout the land. So all the dust of the earth became gnats throughout the land of Egypt. The magicians tried by their secret arts to bring forth the gnats, but could not. They could not. So you can imagine all these little pieces of sand all becoming gnats, and how, they would just cover the faces, the eyes, the ears, the nose of people and animals and just be everywhere. It would have been horrendous. And it's interesting what the magicians say to Pharaoh at this point. They say, "This is the finger of God." Since they couldn't do it by their dark arts, they concluded it's the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. All right, what happens next? The fourth plague. There's a swarm of flies. So again, they get up early in the morning. They find Pharaoh at the riverside here. And then, this is what they say. "I will send a swarm of flies on you and your servants and your people, and into your houses and the houses of all the Egyptians. They will be filled with swarms of flies, and also on the ground which they stand." But, and this is where we see how he sets apart the people of Israel. "On that day, I will set apart the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, and you may know that I am the Lord in the midst of the earth." So these people living among these beautiful temples, this incredibly powerful civilization, also needed to be reminded that I am the Lord, that he is the Lord their God. It wasn't just Pharaoh who needed to understand that, it was also the people. So this is what happens. What happens next? Because Pharaoh's heart continued to be hardened once those flies disappeared. Well, the fifth plague was the death of the Egyptians' livestock. We've seen different images of goats, and there's cattle, and there's all of these different animals around, and of course they needed them. They feed the animals off of the beautiful green lands around the Nile. But this is what Moses says. The hand of the Lord will fall with a very severe plague upon your cattle, which are in the field, the horses, the donkeys, the camels, the herds, and the flocks. Again, the Lord will make a distinction between the cattle of Israel and the cattle of Egypt, so that nothing shall die of all that belongs to the sons of Israel. And you can read that in chapter 9. And this is exactly what happens. But Pharaoh was hardened. His heart was hardened, and he did not let the people go. All right, let's go to the sixth plague. Now, this is a very interesting plague because at this point, Moses and Aaron take handfuls of ashes from a kiln, and Moses threw them towards the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh, and there became fine dust all over the land. But then what happened is that there were boils breaking out all over the skin of men and beasts alike. Again, the magicians were not able to do this, and again, they said that this is something that goes beyond what they can do. So what about the seventh plague? You know that along the sides of the Nile, especially when it would flood, it would bring all of this silt. 80% of the Nile is actually silt. And so that silt would come in and just be deposited along the banks of the Nile, and there would be wonderful crops that would be growing there. And so what would happen at this point is Moses went to find Pharaoh again in the morning. He said, "Let my people go to worship the Lord in the desert." And he says, "If you do not, I will do something," which it says here in chapter 9, verse 16, "that will give me great glory." It says, "For this purpose I have let you live, to show you my power, so that my name may be declared throughout all the earth." All the earth. And so this is very interesting. It's not just among the Israelite people so they remember who their God is. It's not just among the Egyptians so that they recognize among all these gods and all the temples that they have who the true God is. It's actually also so that the Lord's name can be declared throughout all the earth. So this is that plague. "Let my people go, or behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause a very heavy hail to fall, such as never has been seen in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. Hail shall come down upon every man and beast that is in the field, that is not brought home, and they shall die." And so this is what happens. And a terrible hailstorm comes over the entire land of Egypt, and the crops are absolutely beaten down. But it says, even though Pharaoh said to Moses at one point, "I have sinned this time," he recognizes, just like all of us can recognize with this natural law in our hearts, that we sin, we do wrong. He says, "I have sinned this time. The Lord is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Entreat the Lord, for there has been enough of this thunder and hail. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer in the land. And so again, he repents. He recognizes this time that he has sinned, but afterwards, in the end, he hardens his heart. So what about the 8th plague? Well, just think about something of, a terrible hailstorm and everything would be destroyed. Perhaps some of the crops that haven't been growing yet wouldn't be destroyed, and that's exactly what happens. At this point, there's wheat that's still growing, there's other things that are still growing. And so Moses and Aaron again went to Pharaoh and said to him, "The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, says, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go. Or tomorrow, behold, I will bring locusts into your country." And if you've never seen a locust, they're really big. They're quite large. They still have plagues of locusts in this area every now and then. So the locusts were there actually to eat up the rest of the crops that weren't destroyed. This is what it says. Moses stretched forth his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind that would be coming from, at this point from Saudi Arabia area, from that area. The Lord brought an east wind upon the land all day and all night. And when it was morning, the east wind had brought with it locusts. The locusts came up over all the land of Egypt and settled on the whole country. Such a dense swarm of locusts that had never been seen before, and nor will ever be seen again, it says. They crowded over the face of the whole land, and it says, not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field, through all the land of Egypt. It's interesting that at this point, again, the Pharaoh says, I have sinned against the Lord, your God, and against you. So he's understanding these two things, the Lord and his neighbor. And that's what we're going to be talking about more and more when we get into the commandments. I have sinned against the Lord, my God, your God, and against you. So the Lord turned, Moses prays, and the Lord turned a very strong west wind coming from, we would say that's the Sahara Desert, which lifted the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in the land and the country of Egypt. But again, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. So what about the 9th plague? The Lord told Moses, stretch out your hand toward the heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt. Now it's very interesting. We're looking at the Old Testament here again, fulfilled in the New. There was darkness over the land of Egypt for 3 days. Just remember when the Lord himself was on the cross, there was darkness over the whole land after he died. He was in the tomb for 3 days and then he rose. Again, these are just connections that any of the Israelite people would make once they, learned more about Jesus and saw him and heard the testimony of his life from the apostles. So that's exactly what happened. There was a darkness. And this is what Pharaoh said. Go, serve the Lord. Your children can also go with you. Only let your flocks and your herds remain behind. Moses says, no way. We're going to take everything with us so that we can all give worship to the Lord. And so Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Now, at this point, you can imagine it almost gets redundant. And you're thinking, because actually at one point his magicians and his courtiers were saying, let these people go. Don't you see that all of Egypt is destroyed? Again, his heart is hardened. And then Moses gives the warning of the very last plague. And we'll talk about that as we go a little bit further into the desert. And that is when the firstborn of every household dies. And it's the initiation of the Passover. And so we'll talk about that. And that's finally when the Israelite people, the Hebrews, received their freedom, or the beginning of their pathway to freedom. So now that we know what the plagues are, at least the first 9 plagues, it would be good to reflect a little on these signs and wonders, how unusual they are. But let's go even further back. The staff that I've been using is a staff that has a snake on it. And that's because at the beginning when the Lord was speaking with Moses, that staff was turned into a snake. But when Aaron and Moses went to go see Pharaoh, Aaron throws down his staff because Pharaoh demands a miracle to prove that Moses and Aaron were emissaries of God. So when Aaron throws down his staff, it becomes what the Bible calls tanin. And that means it becomes a crocodile, even if in most English translations it says serpent. But that's different than the word used describing Moses' staff when it first turned into a serpent, and also the snake in the Garden of Eden. The Egyptian god Sobek was often represented as a great crocodile that could swallow anything. He patrolled the Nile and protected Pharaoh and Egypt. When you come here to this area, you can visit the Nubians, who usually keep a small cage in their homes with a crocodile inside. I'm not sure exactly why, if it's just for the tourists. But that is a creature. When he's, bothered in any way, he can be vicious. So that was the great god Sobek. So Pharaoh identified himself with this god because of its strength and power, and probably even its agility. Now, Pharaoh's priestly magicians were also able to conjure up crocodiles, the Taninim, by their secret arts. But it's interesting, if you read Exodus 7, these are swallowed up by Aaron's staff, leaving the magicians without their staffs and the authority they represent. This is what the Lord is doing. The God of the Hebrews defeats the god Sobek, whom Pharaoh trusted to defend and protect him in Egypt. And this is more than sort of a simple display of power. It actually is a judgment against the gods of Egypt. And even further, if we look at the first plague, it turns the Nile to blood, like we said. It's a sign that recalls the drowning of Israel's innocent children. Justice is coming to Egypt for this infanticide. But the ultimate purpose of the plagues is to teach a powerful message, that the God of Israel is the one true God of all. By this you shall know that I am the Lord. Those were the instructions to Moses. So the Nile, which was so important for Egyptian economy and livelihood, which was worshipped as a god. In fact, it was called Hapi, H-A-P-I. So to see this Hapi, this Nile, this constant source of life running with blood, which would signify death, what conclusion could you draw? It would simply be that the God of the Hebrews had struck a mortal blow to the Egyptians' beloved god of the Nile, or the god Hapi. Now, the second plague, the multiplication of the frogs, this also brings a judgment on one of the gods. It would actually be a judgment on the goddess Heqt. That would be H-E-Q-T. She was the goddess of life and fertility. She was represented as a woman from the waist down and a frog from the waist up. Very interesting. And so Pharaoh begs Moses, when he's, covered with frogs, to take them away. Moses obliges, and the next day, what happens? Well, Egypt is filled with the stench of rotting bodies, the rotting bodies of the goddess of life. So after the next plagues of gnats, flies, diseases on cattle, boils, hail, and locusts, the Lord tells Moses to stretch out his hand. So Moses stretches out his hand. And it says in Exodus 10 that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness to be felt. So this is the 9th plague. What god is being defeated here? Which Egyptian god is being defeated? Well, our God, the God who created light, takes the light of Egypt away for 3 days. So the God of the Hebrews blows out the sun god Ra like a candle, blown out. So each of the plagues, as we know, follows a similar formula. Moses tells Pharaoh that the plague will occur, that they may know that the Lord is God. And then God sends a particular plague, striking down a god of Egypt. If we look at the book of Wisdom, Wisdom chapter 11, verses 15 and 16, this is how they describe these signs and wonders. It says, "In return for their foolish and wicked thoughts, which led them astray to worship irrational serpents and worthless animals, you sent upon them a multitude of irrational creatures to punish them, that they might learn that one is punished by the very things by which he sins." The plagues point out the emptiness of the entire Egyptian belief system. The gods of Egypt are at the mercy of the Hebrew God. And this is why God tells Moses during the final plague that the gods of Egypt stand utterly defeated. It says in Exodus 12, verse 12, "And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment, for I am the Lord." To think of what it would have been like to see all of this here on the Nile. Remarkable. Thank you for joining us here today as we've covered these great signs and wonders that the Lord has done. We can think about the signs and wonders He performs in our lives and in the world around us. And know that from here, from this place, which has been a witness to the history of salvation, we are praying for you, and may God bless you.